7.4% to 3.33 trillion, and import fell by 0.7% to 3.24 trillion. Trade surplus decreased by 80.6% to 98.33 billion. I wish to highlight the following. First, import and export recovered in March. In March, China's foreign trade reached 2.45 trillion, down by 0.8%. However, it registered an 8.8 percentage point smaller drop than the first 2 months. Export dropped by 3.5% to 1.29 trillion, and import increased by 2.4% to 1.16 trillion. Second, Asean became China's largest trading partner instead of the EU. In the first quarter, trade with Asean increased by 6.1% to 991.34 billion. It accounts for 15.1% of China's total international trade, making ASEAN China's largest trading partner. At the same time, international trade with the EU dropped by 10.4% to 875.93 billion. Trade with the United States dropped by 18.3% to 668.01 billion. Trade with Japan dropped by 8.1% to 465 billion. At the same time, our trade with Belt and Road countries increased by 3.2% to 2.07 trillion, 9.6 percentage points higher than the rate of the overall international trade. Third, private sector registered a smaller drop and higher proportion. In the first quarter, international trade by private sector dropped by 2% to 2.78 trillion, accounting for 42.4% of China's total international trade, 1.9 percentage points higher than the same period last year. Export dropped by 7.3% to 1.71 trillion, accounting for 51% of the total, and import increased by 7.9% to 1.07 trillion, accounting for 33.1% of the total import. As for other types of business, international trade by foreign invested companies reached 2.6 trillion, accounting for 39.6% of the total, and that by state-owned enterprises was 1.16 trillion, accounting for 17.7% of the total. Fourth, general trade took up 60% of the overall international trade. General trade dropped by 5.7% to 3.94 trillion, accounting for 60% of China's overall international trade. Export dropped by 11.3% to 1.95 trillion, and import increased by 0.5% to 1.99 trillion. Processing trade dropped by 12.4% to 1.56 trillion, accounting for 23.8% of the overall trade. Fifth, electromechanicals and labor-intensive products are the most exported products in the first quarter. We exported 1.95 trillion yuan of electromechanical products. It registered a drop of 11.5%, accounting for 58.5% of the total. At the same time, labor-intensive products, including textiles, exported 596 billion yuan, down by 15.3%, accounting for 17.9% of the total. Six, the import of iron ore, crude oil, coal, and other bulk commodities, as well as meat and other essential products, increased rapidly. In the first quarter, we imported we imported 260 million tons of iron ore, an increase of 1.3%, 130 million tons of crude oil, and 95 million tons of coal, an increase of 28.4%, as well as 24 million tons of natural gas, an increase of 1.5%. In addition, we have imported 17 million tons of soybeans, 951,000 tons of pork, and 513,000 tons of beef, all registered a rapid increase. As a result of COVID-19, we have imported 61.91 billion yuan of pharmaceuticals, an increase of 14.8%. As COVID-19 continues to spread around the world, we are facing with higher downward pressure in terms of the world economy, as well as rising uncertainties and destabilizing factors. China's international trade are facing greater difficulties. China Customs will continue to follow the instructions of the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era and implement all the instructions from the CPC Central Committee and the State Council. Continue to promote China's social and economic development, keep the outbreak under control in our ports, improve the business environment in our ports, and help companies to explore international market, try to keep international trade stable, promote China's high-quality opening up, and contribute our share to the completion of China's overall economic and social development. Thank you very much. Now I will take your questions. Thank you very much. With CCTV. This year, in the first quarter, we witnessed a 6.4% drop in China's overall international trade. What is your assessment of this first quarter international trade? And how do you see its further development in the following time of this year? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. In the first quarter, amid the sudden outbreak of COVID-19, under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, we have further cemented the progress made in epidemic control. The CPC Central Committee and State Council adopted a range of policies to ensure stability in foreign trade. Different localities and departments also adopted various measures to orderly reopen businesses. In the first quarter, our foreign trade was down by 6.4%, but compared with the previous 2 months, the decrease was 3.1 percentage points smaller, and there were signs of recovery, which can be shown in the following. First, the trade in March was improved. With the policies to stabilize foreign trade coming into place, the backlog of export orders due to extended halt of production have been delivered. In March, our trade volume was 2.45 trillion yuan, down by 0.8%. Within a month, trade in mid and late March achieved positive growth consecutively. To be more specific, export decrease in March was reduced to 3.5%, while imports grew by 2.4%. And the trade balance turned to surplus from the previous 2 months of deficit. Second, domestic demand has played an important role in promoting import. As industrial production and people's lives are returning to normal, the strong potential of our domestic market has been further released. In the first quarter, our imports was down by 0.7%. In March, import grew by 2.4%. with larger imports of meat and sugar in the first quarter, the import of consumer goods went up by 13%. And the imports of production materials such as coal, crude oil, or sand integrated circuits went up by 23.8, 8.3, 6.8, and 13.1%. The strong domestic market has also contributed to creating global demand. Third, our trade with Belt and Road countries maintained growth. Despite the overall decrease of foreign trade in the first quarter, our trade with Belt and Road countries maintained growth, becoming an important reason for stability in foreign trade. According to our data, in the first quarter, our trade with these countries reached 2.07 trillion yuan, up by 3.2%. Our trade with Asean and Russia went up by 6.1 and 5.7%. As for foreign trade for the whole year, we need to see that COVID-19 is spreading faster around the world. This has created serious impacts for world economy. But according to the latest forecast of IMF, this year the global economy will enter a recession. WTO also projected a large drop in trade in goods. The shrinking international demand will have its impact on our exports. Fewer export orders and other problems will be more strongly felt. So the difficulties facing our foreign trade cannot be underestimated. That said, we need to see that China's foreign trade has a strong resilience and competitive edge, and our companies have the strong capacity to innovate and explore markets. Recently, acting on the instructions of the CPC Central Committee and State Council, localities and departments have taken a series of measures to see stability in foreign trade, help companies to overcome the difficulties, unclog international shipping channels, and stabilize supply and industrial chains. With the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, with the institutional advantage of pooling resources for major undertakings, and with a strong domestic market, we are confident to ensure stability in foreign trade and minimize the impact of the outbreak. Thank you. Next question, please. We noticed an increase of trade with ASEAN, making ASEAN our largest trading partner. What are the reasons behind this? Oh, thank you for your question. In the first quarter, our trade with ASEAN is much better than overall trade. The total volume was 991.34 billion, up by 6.1%. To be more specific, export was 539.43 billion, up by 2.4%. Import 451.91 billion, up by 10.9%. On January the 31st, the UK officially left the EU. This has affected our trade volume with the EU. So plus this Brexit factor, ASEAN replaced the EU to become our largest trading partner with an extra 115.4 billion yuan. There are several reasons behind this. the first quarter, the large increase of trade of integrated circuits, which contributed 3.3 percentage points to the trade growth between us and ASEAN. As an important part of the global supply chain of semi-products, our trade of integrated circuits with Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, and other ASEAN countries became closer and closer. In the first quarter, we imported 105.65 billion yuan of integrated circuits, up by 25.8%, accounting for 23.4% of our total import from ASEAN. We exported 42.75 billion yuan of integrated circuits, up by 28%, accounting for 7.9% of total export to ASEAN. The active trade in integrated circuits contributed 3.3 percentage points to the trade growth between China and ASEAN. Second, energy cooperation and trade has sped up, contributed to 1.7 percentage points to the trade growth between us. In the first quarter, crude oil import and petroleum products export contributed 1.3 percentage points to our trade growth with ASEAN, while the import of coal contributed 0.4 percentage points. Third, our trade with Vietnam and Malaysia has played a leading role, which contributed 5.6 percentage points to our trade growth with ASEAN. In the first quarter, our trade with Vietnam grew by 18%, and our trade volume with Vietnam was the largest among ASEAN countries, which was 25.8%. The growth was 11.9 percentage points faster than the overall trade with ASEAN. Our trade with Malaysia went up by 7.6%. So the trade growth with Vietnam and Malaysia contributed 5.6 percentage points to the overall trade growth between China and ASEAN, which has played a leading role. Fourth, as the China-ASEAN FTA upgrading protocol coming to full effect, the agro-product export to ASEAN has also grown. In October last year, the protocol took full effect to all parties, which has lowered the threshold in rules of origin, customs clearance, trading service, and investment, and further unleashed the dividend of the FTA. This has greatly facilitated trade in agro-products. In the first quarter, our agro-export to ASEAN was 28.45 billion yuan, up by 8.4%, contributed 0.4 percentage points to overall export to ASEAN. The export of fresh dried fruits and nuts, tea, and canned food went up by 31.2, 40.4, and 28.4%. Thank you. Next question, please.
Thank you for your question. Just now I talk about the overall import and export, and I've covered some aspect of China-US trade. I have to say that as we are gradually implementing the Phase 1 deal, we have seen some positives in bilateral trade. Especially recently, we have seen some sound development in the import of American products in China. However, we cannot neglect the negative impact of COVID-19 as well as the longer holiday days. So we are still seeing an overall drop in the bilateral trade. In the first quarter, overall trade reached 668 billion yuan, a drop of 8.3%. Export to the United States reached 476 billion, down by 23.6%. Import reached 191 billion, down by 1.3%. In terms of export, electromechanics reached 292 billion, down by 24.1%, accounting for 61.6% of the overall. We exported 361 billion yuan of cell phone, down by 11.5%, and we exported different parts of at worth 516 billion yuan, down by 31%. And labor-intensive goods, 105 billion, down by 26.1%. Pharmaceuticals was up, however, by 56.3%. In terms of import, we are implementing the Phase 1 deal, so the import of soybean, cotton, pork, and other products are rising rapidly. In the first quarter, agro products imported from the United States increased by 1.1 times, reached 35 billion yuan. Soybeans increased by 2.1 times, reached 7.81 million ton. And the import of meat and cotton have also increased, respectively, by 6.4 times and 43.5%. All these are the major products covered in the Phase 1 deal of China-US trade. Thank you very much, China Daily. What has China Customs done to stabilize China's international trade, and what are the results and highlights? Thank you for this question. We know that last year, China has achieved high-quality development in its international trade. However, with the spread of COVID-19 and higher downward pressure in international trade, we continued to achieve high-quality development in China's international trade. I wish to highlight the following 5 areas. First, despite of the rapid drop in processing trade, the performance of general trade has been better than the overall performance. In the first quarter, processing trade dropped by 12.4% to 1.56 trillion yuan, accounting for 23.8% of the total. However, general trade, which has a higher industrial chain and longer industrial chain and a higher added value and can reflect the ability of companies to develop by themselves, dropped only by 5.7% to 3.94 trillion yuan. accounting for 60% of the total overall trade, and increased 0.4 percentage points in terms of its proportion in overall trade. Second, despite of the drop in the overall volume, we have witnessed a rapid decrease in new types of business. Cross-border e-commerce and other types of new business continue to develop rapidly in the first quarter. Import and export through customs cross-border e-commerce platform increased by 34.7%, and procurement from market increased by 50.9%. Third, despite of the drop with the EU and the United States, we have seen an increase in trade with ASEAN. The EU and the United States has suffered more severely from COVID-19. Therefore, trade with them dropped by 10.4 and 18.3% respectively. However, and at the same time, trade with Japan and the ROK dropped by 8.1 and 5.7% respectively. In March, trade with Japan and ROK has recovered somehow. So import and export increased by 4.3 and 3.4% respectively. However, in the first quarter, we have witnessed an increase in the trade with ASEAN. And the fourth highlight is that despite of a decline in international trade from the eastern part of China, we have seen relatively good performance in central and western parts of China. As China continues to open up to the world, central and western parts of China are performing very well in this regard. In the first quarter, trade from eastern part of China dropped by 7.5% to 5.28 trillion. However, that by central and western part dropped only by 2.1% to 1.04 trillion. And up by 0.7 percentage points higher than the same period last year. And fifth, private sectors registered a smaller drop and higher proportion in China's overall international trade. In the first quarter, international trade by private sector dropped only by 2%, 4.4 percentage points smaller than the overall drop. So it seems that private sectors are more resistant to outside pressure. In March, international trade by private sector increased by 6.5%, making it the main force behind the recovery of international trade in March. So just now I talked about China's overall trade in terms of the first quarter, as well as its high quality development. And I would also like to take this opportunity to talk about the works that we have done, as well as the results. The outbreak of COVID-19 has brought huge pressure to China's international trade. The Central Committee of the CPC and the State Council has instructed that we must try our best to stabilize China's international trade, and we have rolled out several measures to promote the stable development of international trade, measures in support of China-Europe Express Rail, and measures in support of the development of the comprehensive bounded zones. On top of all those new measures, we have rolled out additional measures in order to implement the instructions from General Secretary Xi Jinping during the February 23rd meeting to promote social and economic development. The measures are aimed to facilitate customs clearance in all China's ports. We have in total 50 measures. So on the one hand, we have targeted and effective implementation of existing measures. On the other hand, we have been rolling out new measures to promote the resumption of work and production while controlling the outbreak. Our efforts is to implement all the policy measures to prevent case import, to support the resumption of work and production, to address the difficulties of the companies, and to ensure the smooth operation of the industrial chain and supply chains in terms of international trade. First, we work to streamline customs clearance. During the very special period of COVID-19, we have streamlined the procedures in terms of registration, approval, and customs clearance and declaration for companies. We have finished the registration online for 8,945 companies. We have issued animal and plant quarantine certificates for all 2,768 such kind of certificates with less time than usual, and we have opened fast-track channels for customs clearance. We have removed all the restrictions on customs transit for essential materials, and the sender and recipients are no longer required to be on site for such inspections. And also, at some major ports, we have a 24-hour in advance appointment customs clearance for agro products and food products. Second, we have streamlined requirements for certificates and other materials. During the declaration, the attached documents, including shipment and contracts, are no longer required. And now, digital documents can be submitted first before printed documents. And also, we have been promoting the practice of digital processing, digital certificate, and other types of service online. We have extended our cooperation with foreign authorities for mutual recognition of e-certificates in terms of quarantine. For example, we have been working with the Netherlands so that their export to China can now use e-certificates. And now we allow companies to do group clearance in China, Europe, Express Rail, and the RPR registration can now be done online without submitting paper documents. Third, we have lowered the fees for customs clearance. We have forgiven the overdue fees for some companies that have been affected by the COVID-19, and we have extended the payment deadline for tax declaration involving 1,569 companies and 16.4 billion yuan of taxation, covering 40% of the total payable tax. We have extended the paying warrant involving 106 companies, 640 billion yuan, accounting for 26% of the overall over-the-counter payable taxation. For those companies affected by COVID-19, they can extend their payment deadline up to 3 months without overdue fees. And also, we have been working to facilitate the collaboration between our single window service and banks and insurance institutions to provide unsecured and low interest inclusive financial service and policy-based export credit for over 70,000 companies. Fourth is to nurture new growth points in China's international trade. We have promoted the operation of global maintenance and remanufacturing in our comprehensive boundary zones to create new drivers of international trade and new platforms of opening up. We have supported the development of comprehensive boundary zones in central and western parts of China and transfer more processing trade to central and western part and northeast part of China to make regional economy more open. We supported companies in setting up after-sales service and returns center, and we have enhanced our supervision in this regard and addressed their difficulties in cross-border B2B e-commerce returns so that more companies can be incentivized to go global. Fifth, we have been actively working to cope with the restrictive measures rolled out by foreign countries. We have been working intensively with other countries to urge them to cancel or adjust restrictive measures on imports from China. We have intensified our response to technical trade measures, especially those technical barriers to trade faced by companies when they export. We have raised 5 specific trade concerns and 13 consultation topics during the 81st regular meeting of WTO TBT Committee, and we have received 1,246 pieces of TSPS reports by the end of March, and we have conducted our review on 218 of them and provided 49 pieces of review opinions. We've also conducted specialized training in terms of TBT measures to help companies to better understand those restrictive measures. Thank you very much.
This is quite a professional question. First of all, we list in the press conference of the State Council Interagency Task Force regularly. And at those conferences, my colleagues have given briefings. You may refer to the transcripts of those conferences. And on this occasion, I'm give a brief answer to this question. We have had some relevant regulation on the export of medical supplies recently. During the outbreak of COVID-19, we have strengthened regulation for orderly export of medical supplies so that these supplies can play their roles in the global fight against COVID-19. The China Customs have implemented the decisions of the party and the government, strengthened the regulation and improved services. We support qualified and credible companies to export those supplies to help other countries in fighting COVID-19. You asked about what you asked about has been covered by some notice we issued together with other ministries. Medical supplies concern people's lives, and the Chinese government has given great importance to it and strengthened the regulation of the export of such supplies. We've issued the number 53 notice to better facilitate the orderly export of such supplies. And more interpretation of these regulations will be given by China Customs at relevant press conferences. Thank you. Next question, please. Next two questions, please. Last two questions, please. Oh, Mr. Li, you talked about the growing trade between China and Belt and Road countries. Can you talk more about it? And as the virus is spreading around the world, as the department in charge of port inspection and quarantine, how does China Customs collaborate with these countries in fighting COVID-19? You raised two questions. On the first question, I would like to talk about our foreign trade with Belt and Road countries. In the first quarter, our trade with Belt and Road countries was 2.07 trillion yuan, up by 3.2%. That's 9.6 percentage points faster than overall trade and accounting 31.4% of the total. That's over 30%. To be more specific, export was 1.1 trillion yuan, down by 1.8%. Import 965.44 billion, up by 9.6%. In terms of the commodities, what we imported were mainly crude oil and mechanical and electronics, which went up by 20 and 20.1%, accounting for 29.3 and 28.2% of our total import from these countries. What we exported were mainly mechanical and electronic products, accounting for 53.2% of our exports to these countries. In terms of shipping methods, trade through air and rail transport went up by 21.5 and 14%. It is worth mentioning the role of China-Europe Railway Express in facilitating our trade with Belt and Road countries. According to the data from China Railway, in the first quarter, the China-Europe Railway Express trains made 1,941 trips, up by 15%. This has greatly facilitated the steady growth of our trade with Belt and Road countries during the outbreak. What I've said fully show that China and Belt and Road countries have strong economic complementarity and great potential for foreign trade development, and that Belt and Road cooperation plays an important role in market diversification and stabilizing foreign trade. On your second question, together with customs and quarantine and inspection authorities of Belt and Road cooperation, China Customs have strengthened our cooperation in collective response to COVID-19. We have signed 20 documents on border health inspection and quarantine cooperation with 13 countries and work together for information and technology sharing, cooperation on individual cases and collective responses. This has contributed to our joint efforts to contain cross-border spread of the virus. Now we are actively engaged in setting up bilateral collective response mechanisms with Belt and Road countries. In addition, the General Administration participated 5 video conferences to fight COVID-19 organized by the Foreign Ministry, together with representatives from Central Asian, Eurasian, and South Asian countries, and the EU and other Belt and Road countries. At these video conferences, we shared with them our experience and methods in border inspection and quarantine. We also shared the experience and information in fighting COVID-19. So moving forward, we will step up collaboration with Belt and Road countries. Thank you. Last question, please. Before coming here, I saw some reports of China's foreign trade in the first quarter. Some reported projections. What we hear today is better than those projections. But since many of our trade partners will face the impact of COVID-19 in March, which may cause greater impact on China's foreign trade in the following months. So what's your view on this? You also talked about that China will try every means this year to ensure stability in foreign trade. So do you think it is necessary to downgrade our expectations for foreign trade for the whole year? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I understand you have raised 2 questions. First, what is my assessment of the statistics? So during today's press conference, my main focus is to provide you statistics. Statistics are always faithful reflection of the facts. Different people may have different interpretations of the same numbers, and I believe after today's conference, there will be further explanations or interpretations from experts. But as for the impact, I think it's very obvious, and the impact have also been reflected by the numbers. Of course, we see some recovery in March, and the impact might be different in different areas and different sectors. I will just give you some more numbers to show the impact of COVID-19. So export in the first quarter has dropped. Some of the major export provinces in the coastal area, including Guangdong, Jiangsu, those provinces have experienced like 2-digit drop in terms of their export. I also mentioned the export of electromechanics. It has dropped sharply by 11.5%, and some main sectors, the manufacturing and export of cell phones, have also dropped by 10.8%. These are just numbers. I think it's up to interpretation from different perspectives. As for my analysis of the international trade in the coming months, I think we have already seen some forecasts from the United Nations, from the World Bank and other institutions. They have their interpretation of the possible further drop in international trade. From our perspective, we are still following closely the situation, and I believe we will have a better understanding of the future development based on a more accurate analysis of the numbers. Thank you very much.